Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of the Born to Rise Table Talks. Our aim is to raise our consciousness through inspirational women's stories, use creativity and mindfulness to expand our awareness, and be in community to empower each other to move forward in a positive way. And I'm very excited for my guest today. I got to re-meet this beautiful woman last summer when I was doing a family portrait of her family, and she was definitely the center. It was going to be her birthday soon, and her whole family was around, and I was so moved at how beautiful she was and funny, and had raised these incredible people, like a lot of people. She had raised a lot of people. So please welcome Barbara Parkos. Hi, Barbara.
Hi,
How are you?
happy to be here, Kim.
You look freaking fantastic, which I knew you would. Part of what really drew me to you was your self-expression through your fashion. You know, here at Born to Rise, I really want to always encourage that people be authentic and fully self-expressed, and why that's important. So I guess what I'll start with is just tell us about who you are a little bit, but why self-expression is so big in your life, especially through your fashion or whatever other ways you feel you are well self-expressed.
Well, I'll begin to tell you, Kim, that my dad was a very sharp dresser, and I adored my father. Like many little girls, I was his sunshine. And my father was always dressed, always had a hat on. And from the time I was a toddler, I see pictures of myself in our yard, sticking a peony in my hair in the middle of the part of my braids. And that continued. I kind of took after him in my sense of fashion, wanting to be a little bit different from any of the other kids in kindergarten. That went on up to grade school, grammar school, and a little bit of high school before I got ill. But I've always loved self-expression, and I've kind of always felt like a showgirl. That's who I was. That's who I am. I've been enamored with movie stars. I even worked for Hollywood Paramount Pictures many years ago when I lived in California. And there was a great story, which is part of my salesmanship to this day, why I love sales. I used to go to Paramount Pictures every morning, couldn't get in the gates, those great big black gates, because they didn't let you in without an appointment. And how was I going to get an appointment? I worked for a temporary placement company at the time, and I kind of made friends by flirting with the guard on duty. And each day I would go and I would flirt with him, and I'd wear another very beautiful outfit, sometimes a little bit sexy. Whatever I did, he would not open those damn gates for me. So I came up with an idea. I went to a very close by shop, a beautiful little shop, and I bought a fabulous basket. And in that basket, I put wine, I put caviar, I put flowers, and I brought the basket and I said to him, Hank, will you please see that the woman who's in charge of hiring gets this basket? And he said, Barbara, that is what I can do. I can't let you in, but I can give it to her. I ran home, waited by the phone. We didn't have cell phones then. So I had given her my number. I said, I don't expect you to call me. Her name was Kim also. I don't expect you to call me, Kim, but here's my number if you ever want to. All of a sudden, maybe a couple hours after the basket got delivered, I got a call. And I saw it was a number and I didn't recognize. I picked up the phone. I said, hello. And she said, hi, Barbara, it's Kim from Paramount Pictures. I couldn't even breathe. I was so excited. Just to have someone from Paramount Pictures call me was exciting. And she said, I was so impressed by what you did, and I want to thank you. She said, I really cannot have an appointment with you. I'm terribly busy, and I don't see people ordinarily. She said, but I did want to call and thank you. And I said, Kim, I hear an accent. Are you from New York? She said, I am, but I've lived in California for a very long time. And I said, you know, I'm from Newport, Rhode Island. Have you ever been there? She said, I love Newport. I spend a lot of time in the summer there. So we got off to a chat. By the end of the chat about Newport and New York and accents and women, she said, I'm going to have to meet you in person. Oh my God, I couldn't even breathe. I was so excited. I said, I'm very flexible, Kim. Anytime you can fit me in, even just for a moment or two would be great. Well, she did. I did. I got the job and I met so many celebrities. I even had New Year's Eve with Burt Reynolds and his wife. And he was married to Lonnie Anderson at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was so much fun. So that was kind of a highlight of my career.
Well, I mean, what I'm taking away from this is that, you know, you had a dream of, and you had this bigger dream, but you knew there was a step, right? You have to take that first step, and you didn't let that first step be a barrier. You simply got really creative around it, and really touched on people's people's hearts, because first of course, you know, the way to a man's heart, they say, is food, but sometimes I wonder if it's not, you know, a little something something, brown chicka brown brown. And then you know, you said, well, that's not working, and you didn't let it stop you. Again, you had this dream. And I think what's so beautiful is that's a good reminder that sometimes getting to our dream takes a lot of steps.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you finally got on the phone with Kim, right, perseverance, and you finally get on the phone with this person, Kim, and again, you're making a human connection. It's not this sort of like sales at all. It's
No.
really about their story and your story coming together. And how beautiful is that? So when were you born?
I was born December 8th, 1939, but don't tell anybody.
Oh no, my lips are sealed. What was life like back then?
Life was wonderful back then. I came from a Greek family who came here to Newport. I think they arrived in the 1920s, and my father was a fisherman.
Oh.
We used to, in our little tiny apartment on one of the main streets in Newport, we used to bring what my father brought from work every day, and that's what we brought for lunch to kindergarten, was lobster sandwiches.
Oh,
Now,
yep.
lobster in those years, in the early 40s, mid 40s, was the poor man's food. So it was not like it's considered today a luxury and high priced and fabulous. So we got tired of bringing lobster sandwiches to school. We used to trade to the American kids who had peanut butter and jelly, ham and cheese, sometimes liverwurst if we were lucky. And when we traded one day, I'll never forget, I walked home from school and my mother opened my little bag. We didn't have lunch boxes then. We had brown bags. And my mother opened the bag and she said, whose lunch is this? Because I had left part of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the bag that I didn't finish. And I said, oh, Mommy, I traded. She said, you traded? You can't trade. You can't eat other people's food. You can only eat the food that we fix here in the morning. So by that time, I had to be really careful. When I gave away my lobster and took something in return, I had to make damn sure I didn't have any crumbs left in the bag. So that's kind of how I grew up. My father was a fisherman. My mother did the most remarkable thing that I have told over and over again in my lifetime. My mother was the first person in Newport to pick fresh crab meat. And she did it, Kim, over candlelight because we didn't have electricity. We couldn't afford it. We lived upstairs when they first moved here to Newport, upstairs from a strip joint called the Blue Moon Cafe. And that's where they first came with, they already had two little boys at that time. They had moved first to Somerville, Massachusetts. And when they came to Newport, the boys were little, and then the girls like me started to come. And we were quite poor. But my mother, picking this crab meat, sold it to Lawton's Fish Market on Broadway, which was the only fish market in town. And she and my father saved enough money for my father to open a restaurant, like most Greeks. Wasn't a pizza joint that you see today. They didn't open pizza joints in those years. They opened restaurants with homemade cooking. And from the time I was probably maybe 5 or 6, my father used to give me a box that some vegetables and potatoes came in. And he taught me how to sell at that young age. He would stand me on the box, and I would look the customer right in the eye, and I would say, my mother is in the back of the kitchen making rice pudding and grape nut pudding. Which one do you want? You can't say yes or no to that. So from that great teacher, my daddy, Teddy Parkos, became my life of selling. So growing up was wonderful for me. We had a big family. We had a little apartment, and my father and mother became successful enough that in 1945 they bought a house and we moved. My mother was 9 months pregnant. We moved to this fabulous home on Bliss Road, big house. It almost looked like a mansion to us. And she was pregnant with my baby sister, Elaine. So Elaine was born in this house. And the beauty of that story remains today, because when this pandemic started, the beginning of March, very sadly, my sister had to call and tell me a lovely, beautiful, very much loved niece of ours died at 44 years old, leaving 2 young children and a husband. They lived in Virginia. It was so sad for me. It was hard to handle in the apartment I was living in. I live in senior housing, and the apartments are lovely. And it's an old school that I used to attend that they made senior housing. So it's been wonderful to live there. But my sister was concerned. She said, now that this pandemic has started, why don't you come here? And I packed up and I came to the house I grew up in. And that's where I'm talking to you from today. So it's kind of a beautiful thing, even though the pandemic has been fearful, worrisome, anxious. It's kind of bringing back some beautiful childhood memories, especially of the peonies in the backyard. So that's kind of how I grew up. We weren't allowed to wear lipstick. We weren't allowed to wear pants, long pants to school. So when I started my freshman year at Rogers High School at the age of, I think I was about 13, I had to borrow lipstick. Soon as I got to school, I would say, anybody have Tangy? Tangy was the most popular lipstick in the 1950s. And anyone who was in the girls' room would hand me a lipstick. Well, all that was well and good, but a few months later, someone who handed me a lipstick was a carrier of tuberculosis. And that's how I ended up having tuberculosis at a very young age.
Yeah.
And then that was another story.
I definitely want to ask you about that, but I think it's, first of all, just, you know, what a wonderful story and relationship you obviously had with your father and your mother, and the struggles that they went through, and then the resilience that they had and the perseverance that they had obviously carried on to you, through you. But isn't it interesting how something that, you know, we go along and we want to put some lipstick on, like, seems like no big deal, right? And then all of a sudden that becomes this awful thing. And even the fact that you know, you're now in this home for a reason that you wouldn't expect. And there's always like this yin and yang going on with good and evil, or
Yes.
good and bad. And it's, It's kind of fascinating. So I guess I'll go ahead and, ask you about that time, because we definitely want to talk about that time and how it reflects into the time we're in now. But so you were only 13 when you got the tuberculosis?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Low
so
pass.
give us a little story with that, because what happened after, I mean, how did you know you had it and what happened?
Well, I was at a basketball game at school. I think I was close to 14 at this time. And I was at a basketball game watching my boyfriend play basketball. Yes, I had a boyfriend then. My parents didn't know
I'm
about it.
not surprised by that.
It was a, it was a secret. That started my love affair with men in my life, I guess. And I was watching Richie, his name was Richie Toner, play ball. And all of a sudden, I got a coughing spasm. I was staying at my aunt's at the time because my mom and dad, for the first time in their 25-year marriage, were going away and did go to Tarpon Springs, Florida for their vacation. And when I had the coughing spasm, I was bringing up a lot of blood, a lot of blood. So the ambulance came and rushed me to Newport Hospital. My parents were called in Florida. And I was put in confinement, isolation, and I didn't know why. The only thing I ever knew about isolation were even the nurses couldn't come in my room without wearing full gowns, face masks. And I said, "What's going on? I must have leprosy," because I had read in a storybook people with leprosy had their limbs and things falling off and nobody could be near them. And it was so frightening for me thinking I had leprosy. When my mother and father were called by our family doctor, Serps, his name was, they said, "Teddy and Mary, you've got to come back right away. Barbara's got tuberculosis, and we're going to have to put her in a sanatorium for a while. And you have to be here for me to tell her this." My mom and dad drove from Florida, never having their vacation, and stopped only for gas, not even for food. They were so worried. And they got to the hospital in the middle of the night, came near the room, and the doctor met them, even at that horrible hour. And my father said, "I want to see my daughter. I want to be near her." And Dr. Serp said, "No, she's confined. You cannot." My father walked right through and hugged me and held me. And my mother was there with me. And the doctor came in the room and explained what I had. And I didn't know anything about tuberculosis at the time. I'd never even heard of TB. But they told me that it was bad. It was a horrific disease, but there may be a cure for me. So in the morning, my mother and father came back with the doctor. They put me in a car, surprisingly, with the doctor driving. And it was over a 2-hour ride to the mountains where I was going to be. And on the way there, I was sitting in the back with my mom, and my doctor and my daddy was sitting in the front. And as we were driving, I just didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't tell me how long I would be there. So in my 14-year-old mind, I was going to go have an examination and go home. I didn't know that it was going to be any different. On the way to the place, which was called Wallam Lake, today it's known as Zambarano Hospital. And on the way, I saw in the trees, I was looking up at the trees, and I saw this really old wooden sign with an arrow, and it said Wallam Lake. So we kept going from that sign way up the hill, and we reached this huge building, red brick. And we ran around the back, and the doctor opened the door, and there was another doctor that greeted us, took me in the examining room that I thought, okay, they're going to look at me, they're going to give me some medicine, and I'm going to go home. I didn't. So when I was being examined, there was a cloth drape, of course, covering me. and they put a Johnny on me, this kind of gray Johnny. And being a little fashionista, that wasn't a cool Johnny at all. But anyway, I put the Johnny on, and my parents were on the other side of the drape, and the doctor examined me, and he went to whisper to my parents, she does indeed have tuberculosis, and it's in one of her lungs, and we have to put her on a very intensive care. And hopefully it's going to take about 2 years. And when I heard that, I got up off the examining table and I started running to find the door. And my father ran after me. And he said, come back, come back. I said, no, Daddy, they're not keeping me. I think he said 2 years, and I can't stay 2 years. I'm a cheerleader. I'm editor of the freshman school paper, and I can't be away. And I can't stay in this horrible place. So he held me and walked me back to the examining room. And they got a bed ready for me. It was an old iron bed in a very small room with another iron bed in it. And they brought me in, and the head doctor came in and said my parents had to leave because they had to do much more examining and chest x-rays and all of that. And I was terrified. I was so terrified. I was screaming and screaming and screaming. And the doctor said, all of a sudden, his name was Dr. O'Brien, and he was holding me down to the bed so they wouldn't strap me in. And all of a sudden he said to me, you don't have your ears pierced. And I said, no. I stopped crying. I said, no, I'm not allowed to until I'm grown up. And he said, can you keep a secret? I said, what secret? And he said, I'm going to pierce your ears. And he said, I'm going to be right back. And he left the room, and he came back with a needle and some alcohol and a little cotton ball. And he pierced my ears. And he put in little gold studs in my ears. Later, I found out he had gotten them from one of the nurses. And I was so excited that I got my ears pierced. For a few moments, I forgot why I was there and how long I would be there. They brought in a few days, a little girl named Clara, and Clara was 16. And we became more than friends or roommates or hospital mates. We became sisters. I missed my sisters, my brothers, my mother, my father, my home. Clara and I used to be able to fall asleep holding hands over a little pink chair, a little small chair that was between our beds. And we would talk about school and our friends and everything. And she became my sister, Clara. Well, less than a year, I think it was about 6 months, if I've got the timing right, we were able to have our beds pushed downstairs to a ward where they had infants, babies, who had spinal meningitis. I never forgot those words. And we were asked to feed those babies. Can you imagine? They would put them in our arms, in our beds, and we would have a bottle and feed these dying children of spinal meningitis. And we would go down once a week because they didn't have enough nurses to take care of these children and feed them. So they took us thinking, oh, this will give them something to do, I guess. And so we'd go down, would feed the babies, and I'll never forget one week when I was down, I said, can I see Alice again? She was so good and so sweet. And the nurse said, Alice died. Here's another baby. And I thought, what hell is this that I'm going through? So we knew that when we went down and they put another baby in our arms to be fed, it probably wouldn't be the same baby, because in those years when babies were born with spinal meningitis, they died. So we went back
Let
to
me
our,
give you a little breath and just, you're so beautiful, but I want to just give you a minute. Yeah, this is a lot. I hope it's not, you know, triggering too much, but you're so beautiful and you're sharing and so have so much grace. First of all, that must have just been such a challenging time for such a young person too. And those were your kind of formative years, if you will. And wow, talk about a shocker. And to feel that, you know, I have a couple questions, more sort of scientific, but so just real quickly, is tuberculosis transmitted only through like saliva? Is that why the doctor was able to be with you? And why would they keep your parents away if it was only through that? Or maybe I'm not understanding it correctly.
TB during that time, Kim, was a disease that was, you could get it very easily. Sort of like today. Now that I'm just thinking about it for a moment, you know, they all wore masks so they wouldn't transmit the disease. It could be done with sputum. It could be done like I had it, someone's lipstick who was a carrier and not ever had the tuberculosis, but was a carrier. And it was so transmittable that they didn't want anyone near you. And that's why my parents were asked to leave and they couldn't see me.
And
And they,
what about the girl whose lipstick you borrowed? Had she been sick as well? Did she get?
not at all. She was a carrier. Like today, when they
Ah,
tell you you can be a carrier of this coronavirus and never have it, but you can transmit the illness to someone,
right.
which is so important. That's exactly, now that I think of it, it's exactly what it was like back then. Yeah, you could get it from a carrier. Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, we didn't have the technology that we have now. You weren't able to
Right.
use FaceTime to see your parents. So that's
Mm.
2 years in your teenage life, basically having phone calls, I'm assuming. That's about it, right?
No, we didn't have phone calls. We
Really?
didn't. No, we didn't have a phone in our room, and there was no way we could use a phone. That was only for medical purposes. But once I was there, it was close to a year. My father would come up. They had a restaurant, so it was hard for them to get away. But my father would come up with the biggest Genoa salami, the whole damn thing, not slices. And he would bring that with a bunch of bread. And my girlfriend, my roommate Clara, and I would hide it so the nurses wouldn't see it and we wouldn't have to share it. We ate more, and to this day, that's my favorite thing, Genoa salami with Italian bread.
Oh, I bet it was probably the highlight of your two
It
years
was,
there, besides, you
it
know,
was.
meeting someone who sounds quite wonderful, Clara.
Yeah.
Are you still in touch with Clara?
No, I'm not. When I was there less than a year, one night we were asleep and the nurse came in and put the light on. And I said, "Why are you putting the light on? We're still sleeping." And she said, "Go back to sleep, Barbara. Clara just died."
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
So,
wow. A lot of bad stuff, but some highlights from that time, you know. Um, they taught us things, and some very low lives. And I will share this with you because I think it's important today for women to know that part of my story. When I was in bed a little more than a year, I was allowed to get up and go shower instead of having a bed bath, to go shower in the bathroom, which was very close to my bedroom, my hospital bedroom. And the first time I went in there, I had a Johnny on. We weren't allowed to wear clothes. And I had my towel and my soap. And I walked in the bathroom, and there were 3 women in there, much older women, not teenagers. And I pushed open the drape for the shower, still dressed. I was brought up with very modest family, with a very modest mother and father. We never even left our bedroom without having a bathrobe over our pajamas. So I opened the curtain to put the shower on, and one of the women said, "Take your Johnny off before you go in." I said, "No, I don't want to." She said, "Take it off." And I didn't. I went in the shower with my Johnny, and two of the women came in the shower, and they had something in their hands which was called Babo cleaners. I don't know what it would be today. Ajax, that's what it would be. It was powder. And they put the powder on their hands, and they put it all over my body until it was bleeding. And they said, "Never come in this bathroom without letting us see your body." And they were there for a very long time in the hospital. They had TB that never got better, never got cured. So the only physical happiness they had was on each other's bodies to make them feel okay and feel good and feel better. I understood that much later in life, certainly not as a 14-year-old child. All I knew was they wanted to see my nakedness. And they said if I went into the bathroom hiding from then on, they would do that same thing to me.
Yeah, Barbara, that's so hard and so beautiful in your mindset and your processing here. And I really honor you for sharing something that I'm sure was a very challenging time. There's something really interesting about knowing why someone is doing something, even when it's so evil, and finding that forgiveness somewhere. Maybe not in that moment, and maybe not for a very long time, maybe never. But what enabled you to get to the point of recognizing that? I mean, it seems like you've forgiven them.
I did, and I have.
What was the turning point on
Well,
that?
to finish just that small part of my life that was so significant for me, I made a deal with them. I was so smart at that age, I guess. Here was the salesman coming out on me, from me. And I said to them, "What can I do for you that I won't have this happen to me again and I can keep my Johnny on?" And they said, "Well, we're going to have you moved into our room," where there were one, two, three, there were, I think, 4 hospital beds where they lived. I mean, they were down the hall. "We're going to ask them to move you into our room. And when you're in the room at night, you're going to be our lookout for the nurse. And when you hear her, or when you can hear her steps," which we could, there were like old floors there, "you're going to let us know so we can jump out of each other's beds." So I became a lookout for them. So because I became a lookout, they let me keep my Johnny on when I had a shower. It took me a long time to understand this. Many, many years later, it stayed with me for a very long time, with hate and how could they be so evil? And what were they doing in each other's beds? But I came to forgive that part of them. They were lonely. They were there forever. At least with me, I knew that one day there'd be a day that I would be home again and they wouldn't. So I came to forgive them, and I'm glad I did.
Well, I am very glad that you survived. I'm very sorry for those who didn't. That was, I know, a very challenging time, probably in the history of health and wellness, right?
Yeah.
And I think that what is so, I mean, I'm just blown away right now, is that, you know, when you share stories like this, and you know, I meet you on the street, so to speak, I have no idea that these things have happened to you, right? All I see is this fabulous woman with a beautiful big family that seems, you know, seems, right? There's that word. It seems from our perspective that everything is happy and, oh, they've got it all together. They must be so this and so that. And we make these assumptions about people, not knowing how freaking amazing and resilient and beautiful and horrible and all of that their lives have been, and what has shaped them throughout the years to be who they are. And this is exactly why I love this type of sharing. So we'll get back to this idea of sharing in a minute, but what I'd love to jump to is, obviously we're in a similar situation now, right? Where we're kind of,
So much so, Kim. So
yeah.
much so.
And the thing that's interesting and maybe different or the same is that we do have the technology to share like this, yet there is this sense that we are in an isolation. We don't get to choose even who we're with, necessarily, right? I mean, fortunately, your sister was able to bring you and be together, because you both had been contained for a while and so on. But how does this feel to, is it bringing up any kind of, like, do you feel like that time in your life prepared you, or it's worse because, you know, like, where are you in all of that?
I think I think I wrote something about it. I'm writing on Rebecca's Corona Chronicle writing group. And I think it was yesterday that I wrote in a word that's always, always helped me in my life. And it's a small word, a powerful word, and the word is hope. I think I had it then, and I think I've carried it all through my life. And my father used to say to me that I never saw the glass half full or half empty. I always saw it overflowing. And I think that's how I've lived my life. Um, does today affect me because of my past and what I went through for those 2 years? Yes, it has affected me, but not in sadness. I think about a few of the things that happened to me then, but you know what, Kim? Other people have gone through much more than I did. And I think about that a lot. When I see children who are crippled, when I see children that are dying because of an illness, I was lucky. I was lucky. That was 2 years of my life that I lost, and I went through my own hell. But I never look back and say, poor me, woe is me. I look back and say, it could have been worse. It
Well, I
could
think,
have been worse.
yeah, and I think that, you know, sometimes our most traumatic, dramatic, difficult, challenging times are the times that really, wow, I mean, stretch us and grow us and awaken us to parts of ourselves that we might not have even recognized before, like, you know,
Right.
resilience and that hope. Like, you know, where does that hope come from? You know, was it something that was always there and now it's just being tapped on to awaken a little bit, you know? I mean, I love that word too. I love the word hope because I think it keeps us thinking in a positive, forward moving way. And I'm so glad that you got through that, and you know
You
that.
know, I think during this month of this pandemic, I still have a very positive approach about it because there's a light at the end of this horrific tunnel, just like there was a light at the end of mine, all those some 68 years ago that I was suffering. There was a finish line, and I got to it. There's a finish line for this, and we're going to get to it. And that's what keeps me going.
Well, you, and that's what we can choose to focus on versus choosing the negative parts, right? And I think that's how hope in a universal sense can really be powerful, is that when we can come together and choose to see the light
Oh,
versus
yes.
the dark, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you just sort of maybe a fun question, maybe not, but who was your greatest love?
You would go there, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, I go there, girl. I like to go there.
My life, Kim, in the 80 years I've lived it, I have so many stories. And my daughter Rebecca is always saying, tell them to me, record them, record them. I'm not disciplined. I'm a Sagittarius, and Sagittarius, they live in another dimension. We're not disciplined. Who was the greatest love in my life? It's funny. I think the greatest love in my life was my last love, my last boyfriend. And it took me a while to find that kind of love that when he walked in the room, my heart skipped beats. Yeah, it really happened. It wasn't just a story. When he got dressed, and he was such a fabulous dresser, we would get dressed, he would take me dancing. Even his touch was something magical for me. So I would say there's quite a story to that finish line, let me tell you. What I did not know was he was leading a double life. So we'll talk about that another time. He
Ah,
had,
don't you hate that?
that was my children know about that. He was handsome and so wonderful to be with. I was so totally in love with him because the first important man in my life, my first husband, the father of my wonderful children, and I have him to thank for that, no regrets. That was sort of arranged in my life. I was very young. My mother was very worried that I would not be well. So they got me engaged at a very early age, 16. When I got back from the hospital, I was in my third year of high school. I got engaged, had my junior prom with him, had my senior prom with him, got graduated in June, married him in July, this big Greek wedding. So there were some happy times. We had 4 fabulous children. And he was not the great love in my life. And when I divorced him after 17 years, I fell in love with a young man 20 years younger than me. He smoked pot, he had a motorcycle, he had everything I dreamed of as a teenager. So at 35 years old, I got on the back of that Harley and off we went. Regrets, no, but maybe one. Maybe not paying attention to the fact that I was a young mother with 4 children and I wanted to be a teenager. So that was hard on my children. It's something that they have forgiven me for. But anyway, getting back to the love of my life. And then after that, I married him and we got rid of the bike. And I fell out of love. I think maybe I was more in love with teenage than I was with him. But he taught me a lot of things. He taught me what it was like to lay on a beach and watch the sunrise. I had never done that. He taught me for a very short time how to smoke pot. And that was okay at the time. He taught me how to sit in a room with these huge speakers and listen to music from the 70s that I was so unfamiliar with. The only music I was allowed to listen to in my first marriage was either Frank Sinatra or Greek music. So I had no idea what Earth, Wind, and Fire was. I had no idea until my second husband on the motorcycle when we were dating before we got married took me to a concert, a real live concert. I'll tell you a funny story that happened. So we went to the concert. It was in Connecticut. And when we got there, I said to him, Wayne, why are they selling batteries at a concert? And he laughed. He got the biggest kick out of me, even though I was so much older. I was so innocent. And he said, honey, they're not selling battery acid. They're selling acid. I said, what's acid? He said, it's a drug people take to get high. I said, what do they do that for? Aren't they happy? And thank goodness. There's another story for another time.
Oh,
But
I feel like you have so many, and we're just going to have to keep going,
you have
right?
no idea. So the love of my life, the last man in my life, his name was Bill Thompson. And he passed away a few years ago, but I still have great memories of what it felt like to be really and truly and magically in love.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have such a cultural thing in this country that we find the one, right? We find this, unless it's arranged, of course, which we don't do too much of that anymore, but some traditions, I suppose, do. But,
Yeah.
you know, this idea that we find this one and that they're going to give us everything we need and make our lives complete, and that we stay with them till the day we die. And
Right.
sometimes, you know, that works. And
Yeah.
but you know, you seem like the type of person who really operates from the heart, and I do appreciate that. And yet I notice some sadness come up that you feel like sometimes that hurts some people. So where do we draw that line between following our hearts and responsibility? You know, where do you feel like that pulls us as women? And I think as women even more so, we feel that pull of responsibility.
Do we ever draw that line, Kim?
That's the pondering question, I suppose. Is I think actually a lot of women probably work more from the responsibility side than they do from the heart side, or even the cultural side, like what's expected of us.
Exactly.
What was outlined for the way to behave. And even for men, there was an outline.
Sure.
I just think we were a little more caged in with our outlines, so to speak.
Yeah.
Didn't have quite the choices. But, you know, I think there is a balance there. I really do. And I think for myself, I'm striving for that balance of working from my heart and taking care of those who
Yeah.
who need me.
Well, I don't know if I've ever found that balance. Maybe balance for me is a different kind of balance. And maybe for a lot of women, it's not just the balance itself. It's just like, what do they call those? A seesaw? A seesaw?
Teeter-totter or a seesaw.
Two people get on a seesaw. That's kind of how I feel about what you just asked me. Sometime I'm on one part going up high and then low and high and low. I'm not sure I've ever achieved it for myself personally. I've tried, God knows, I've tried. But I don't know.
One thing I've become fully aware of, I study Buddhism and I read the Dharma, and I try to learn about how my mind can guide me in ways that aren't always true. You know, the things that I kind of make up versus what is real. And I think I've kind of lost my train of thought all of a sudden. But anyway, I was thinking that one thing that I've learned is that I am not responsible for other people's feelings. I'm only responsible for my actions, and then how people respond to those actions are really up to them. Yet I watch those actions to see if they're in line with my values and my morality and all of those kinds of things. And so there's something to be said for you living a full, rich, heart-centered life and sort of letting the chips fall where they may, so to speak. Because I'll tell you what, I know your daughter Rebecca pretty well now. Over the years we've got to know each other, and she is a wonderful person. And she may have some pain, like we all do, with parents or histories of family issues or what have you, but she's so strong, from at least from my perspective, and so
Very. Yeah.
giving and has so many talents. So, you know, where is the fault, if there is any, in the you sort of going off with a guy on a motorcycle and smoking some pot for a couple of years and finding yourself? You know, I don't think there is.
You know where I see that balance, Kim? It's funny. I see it in my 4 children, and I have come to know part of me is in each of them. So there had to be a responsible balance in some way. Maybe that way is unique for me, but I see it in each one of them in huge ways. You only know Rebecca, you don't know the other three. But let's just say in Rebecca, I said to her the other night when I was listening to her, and she is such a great teacher, and her patience with people. At times I would have said, I already told you that. I said that already. She never does that. She listens calmly. That's why people are drawn to her so very much. And after I hung up the phone, telling her how proud I am of her, I thought, she did get something of that from me. Maybe I have to dig way down deep to find it, but she's my daughter.
Yes, yes. And that's the beauty of, you know, the passing along and what we leave
Yeah, yeah,
behind
it
and all of
is.
that. So I
Yeah,
have two more questions. One is,
sure.
what do you most fear?
Good question. Very quick answer. Health.
You fear health.
I do, Kim. When I go to a doctor, and this all stems, I've been in therapy over it for years, and it stems back to my illness. I never believed them. When I thought I was going to be at Wallem Lake for 2 weeks, that's what they told me to get me there, and it was 2 years. Now I go to a doctor, and I'm a pretty healthy 80-year-old, thank God. I go to the doctor, and he says, let me examine, this is a for instance, let me examine your eyes. And I think to myself, oh my God, I hope he's not going to tell me I'm going to go blind. I think the worst. I get over it, but right away, that's my fear. It's a terrible one, but it's truthful. It's my fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's pretty understandable. The good thing is that you know that it's a conjuring of sorts in
Yeah.
the mind, and that
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
learn to
Mm-hmm.
recognize that. So that's really
Yeah.
great. And then just to let you speak about this a little bit, I know you do some public speaking and you share your story and all of that. Why do you think it's important to share your story like this? And I'm just so grateful. I know why I love hearing it, but why do you
Mm-hmm.
think it's important to share stories?
I think, you know, it's funny. I belong to a breakfast club group with people that I went to school with, old dear friends. And they always want me to tell them about my life. My life has been extraordinarily adventurous. I've lived in so many different places. And they love to hear my story. But then I stop them and I say, tell me yours. And I remember one of my girlfriends, who I've known since childhood, said, I don't have a story. I lived in the house on Mumford Avenue. I was born there. I got married there. I still live there. I have my children there, blah, blah, blah. I've been married 50 some years. And I say to her, that is a story for me. There is a story. My stories are familiar. Your stories are not. So I think each one of us, as women particularly, can share our personal stories that give to other women that link into another life of another woman's story that helps them. For me, it's been a catharsis like you cannot believe. When I am talking to medical conferences and colleges about what happened in my life of tuberculosis that they're not familiar with today, when I leave there, I leave with such a sense of catharsis. Even today, when I leave this meeting, this invitation, I'm going to leave with such a happy heart because another part of my heart has been cleaned and repaired. And I think that's what each of us can do to another heart. Help it clean and help it repair.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that. I know that when I shared my story live on stage one, in a talk, I remember standing backstage and even having that last little thread of doubt that my story was worth sharing, or that, a big enough story, or whatever you want to make up about, being on a stage, right, in front of a lot of people. And I just thought to myself, you know what? It's something that happened that didn't happen to somebody else, but could. And if I can help one person in this process, let me be that vessel of information.
Exactly.
I just opened my arms backstage and said, let me be this vessel. And so I think it takes a lot of vulnerability to share like you did today. And I don't know where it comes from individuals. I'm comfortable with vulnerability, I guess, on some level. And I think sometimes it's easier to share someone else's story than our own, of course, because there is that vulnerability piece. But I'm in this moment very grateful for your story. I think that women are where we are. I am where I am today because of women like you who had the same gumption I have now, that have the same desires and passions, but we're not given the same privileges that I have and that my daughter has and that your daughters have. And so you paved the way for us to see what's possible in your fashion, in your grace. You've been challenged, yet you're still standing. And I just want to honor you in that. And I know you have so many more stories, and I hope that I can interview you again sometime. But
This has been wonderful for me. I thank you, Kim. I thank you for part of my healing, because every time something wonderful like this happens in my life, and it has been wonderful to have you interview me, I feel that, okay, that's a part of me and it's healed. It's done.
Yeah, there's something really beautiful about being able to share and get that out, as well as hearing others and being a good listener, right? Yeah. So thank you so much, and Barbara. I'm just honored, and I wish you a beautiful day and good health with this pandemic we're dealing with. And I hope that the audience will learn from your resilience and your values in hope, around hope.
Yeah. That's the word. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.